Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar, Implementing Recognized Security Practices is Important to Your Practice, um, is a new topic that we're introducing, and we hope you'll find it beneficial. A couple of little housekeeping things before we get started. There is a poll open at the bottom right hand corner of your screen asking if you have implemented recognized security practices, and if you have, which tool are you using? Also, a copy of the presentation doesn't look like it made the download. Sorry, we'll email that out with the the email with the link to the recorded webinar. But there are a couple of other files that might be beneficial as you start looking at um, instituting recognized security practices. Questions and answers may be entered at any time during the presentation using the Q&A pod, and we will hopefully be able to get to many of those questions at the conclusion of the webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today. Shawn Tuma is a cyber attorney with Spencer and Fane and is currently located in one of the Dallas offices. Shawn helps businesses protect their information and protect themselves from their information. He represents a wide variety of clients, including healthcare from small to mid-sized companies, in, all the way up to Fortune 100 across the US and globally, dealing with cybersecurity, data breach, and incident response. Um, Shawn has been practicing in cyber law since 1999 and is widely recognized as an expert in cybersecurity and data privacy law. He's frequently sought after to present on cybersecurity topics, as well as being hired by other law firms to advise them when issues arise with their own data privacy issues. While this area of law has evolved greatly over the years that Shawn has been practicing, he continues to evolve with it as a practitioner, representing his clients academically and as an author and instructor and an analyst for national media. We are so lucky to have Shawn here today to help us demystify the topic of recognized security practices. Before we get started, just a quick review of our objectives. By the end of the program, we want you to be able to discuss what recognized security practices are, and explain how to assess and document your compliance, and primarily identify your current compliance with the practices. So, Shawn, usually when we talk about compliance, there are many, many different topics that we could be discussing from a law, both from federal and state standards. But today we're going to focus mainly on recognized security practices and how that interrelates to HIPAA. Did you have a comment on that, Shawn? Sorry.
Yes, I see the slide. I don't know what the slides are doing on your end, but they're kind of.
I know they're
Let me see if we can go back.
okay.
Let's see. There we go. Okay. Do we have the little sunshine slide?
Yes.
Because that's what we're doing today. We're brightening everyone's lives by helping to hopefully bring some clarity and some simplicity to this otherwise mind numbing, and I know that because I've been in it for a long time, process of dealing with cybersecurity. But first, Kathy, I just want to thank you for your very kind introduction and for the opportunity to be here and speak with the audience today. I always appreciate the time you and I get to spend talking about cyber risk, risk management, compliance, and I appreciate all the good work you do in that area as well. So thank you very much for having me be a part of this. Um, as for this particular slide, one of the things people often ask at the beginning of many of my presentations, even if they are too polite to raise their hand and ask it, they're wondering it. They're saying, "What the heck do I have a lawyer talking to me about cybersecurity and cyber risk issues for? Shouldn't I have an IT person or a CISO or someone who is a technical advisor talking about these issues?" And the answer to that is, of course, you should, because cyber risk is a team sport. You should have IT. You should have, people in your risk department if you have that, or you should have, your managed service provider or whomever you're relying on for your technical expertise. Maybe it's your office administrator doing the very best they can to keep up with this. You should certainly have IT involved. But one of the things you can see from this slide is cyber risk and compliance are absolutely legal issues because they involve compliance with many of these legal and regulatory schemes out there, such as PCI DSS. If you're dealing with payment cards, you understand that. Everyone has to focus on state data security, data breach notification laws, and then, of course, your contractual obligations in the area of healthcare, where we're going to really see those are going to be your business associates agreements, sometimes going upstream or downstream, depending on where you fit. And that pulls us right into HIPAA because first and foremost on all of our minds is HIPAA when we're talking about healthcare and compliance. And, so understanding that who we answer to in the healthcare space, who's carrying that oversight responsibility, who we have to report incidents and events to, or incidents or breaches, I should say, not necessarily events, is going to be the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Civil Rights, and most of that's going to come under the HIPAA requirements. And so one of the things we've seen, Kathy, you and I together, but we've seen as legal counsel representing clients that are going through these HHS OCR data requests or inquiries or investigations are over the last year, the focus on recognized security practices and how important that has become as a mitigation factor in these investigations and what they call data requests or whatnot. In fact, we just got a request this week for another one in one of our healthcare cases like this. So it's very important to keep this at the front of your mind and understand that there's a lot of good reasons why you need to be paying attention to this.
Thanks, Shawn. I think all of us probably know this next slide, but I think it's worth a little bit of discussion um, as to what are the leading cybersecurity threats to healthcare today. And so, any thoughts on number one, email phishing attacks?
Absolutely, Kathy. We all hear the words phishing. We see the alerts and the bulletins and all of that. But despite that awareness, um, phishing still year after year comes out to be really the leading cause of most successful cyber attacks. as well as very minor kind of data breach type events that have drastic consequences many times. A lot of people, when we're talking cyber risk and cybersecurity, still have it in their mind that we're talking about this very complex um, nation state sponsored, James Bond type attack that's dealing with code and breaking into computers on these code based levels. And that's what they have in their mind. And they find comfort in that because they think, oh, well, our practice is not one that's at that level, or we're not getting that kind of attention, and so we're not at risk from this, so we can just kind of ignore all this stuff because it's not going to happen to us. And the simple fact is, those are those small, you know, sometimes solo practices, sometimes only a few practitioners, sometimes only one office, only a couple offices, only one server, only a couple servers. Those are the kind of practices that we see as much of these cases come in from as we do the really large, sophisticated multi-state practices or multi-regional, multi-state hospitals. Um, Folks, this is coming in from all over the place and it's impacting all of you. And where many of these start from is a simple phishing attack. It can be something as simple as an email saying, open this spreadsheet, coming into accounting. Or it can be something coming into your practice administrator, who has elevated credentials for an email that comes in that looks authentic. You click on it, you open it, and then it's not until it's too late that you realize, that it's dangerous and malicious. So, email phishing attack is still the number one cause. Um, it plays on our human nature. It's using deception to fool us, to trick us into opening it. This time of the year, we're all getting text messages, we're getting emails saying your FedEx delivery, or I got one this weekend, your postal service delivery can't be completed. You need to complete this and send it back. Don't fall for it. These are all malicious attacks, so very dangerous.
Of course,
And
the
the next
phishing,
one,
yeah, the phishing
yep,
attacks leads right into number two.
this is the bad one. I mean, the phishing attacks are bad in that they give what we call threat actors access to your information and your environment to then do many things. Many of the times, what they're doing is trying to gain privilege within your environment so they can launch a ransomware attack. Those ransomware attacks come in through emails, phishing emails, a lot of times. They come in through practices using open RDP, what we call RDP, which is remote desktop access. It makes it easy to work remotely, to work from home, to work from, being with vacation on the family. But those are very vulnerable to attacks. And so we've got to use a lot of caution with that in how we protect that. But ransomware attacks are still very, very prominent. The threat actors behind these love going after people in the healthcare industry because they know that you have very sensitive networks and very sensitive data, and you need access to that information to be able to treat your patients. They know you're much more likely to acknowledge and respond because you're in a very highly regulated industry, healthcare, and they know that the OCR has been enforcing actions based on ransomware attacks, so it's going to get your attention. They know that the data you have is very sensitive, and it's very important that it be protected. And so they're using two primary ways of extortion for that ransom. One is the encryption type attacks that we've seen for really many years now. That's where they get in, they encrypt your network, and they shut it down so you can't then treat patients, you can't conduct business, you can't collect your payments, you can't do billing which a lot of times really creates a lot of problems, especially nearing year end. That's one vector of attack they use. The other is before they launch that encryption event, they get into your environment and they steal all of your data. And so they steal your patient records, they steal your billing records, and they start using that as an additional threat to say, if you don't pay us, we're going to publish this data. We're going to start calling these individuals. We're going to start harassing your patients. All of these kind of things that happen. So ransomware is a big, big issue right now.
The third one is loss or theft of equipment or data.
This is one that we forget about in the world of cyber attack often, or data breach often, because again, we like to think about the complex, sophisticated type of attacks. We don't think about the fact that on these devices right here, on our laptops, on our USB thumb drives that we're carrying around information many times, maybe our portable backup drives that we're using to back up our data, that if we're not encrypting those devices, if they get lost, if they get left in an Uber or at the airport or somewhere else like that, if they're not protected with a passcode and encrypted as they sit there, that is absolutely a data breach. That is a reportable event. And then, when you contact me as the breach coach, if you will, who's going to counsel you through this process, or when you contact Kathy right off the bat and say, Kathy, this just happened, what do I need to do? One of the first questions we're all going to ask you is, well, what data did you have on those devices? And you're going to probably tell us, I have no idea, because I don't have that device to go look at it now to be able to tell you what was on it, because it's now lost. And what that means many times is we're going to have to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort by the professionals you engage, but also by you and your staff, of trying to go in and figure out what data was on that device to a reasonable certainty. And if we can't, that means you're going to have to most likely notify all of your patients or all of your workforce or whomever could have been affected by that. And so a simple lost device, or even worse, a stolen device, can cause a lot of problems and can be very expensive. We've had situations, especially this time of the year, when not just cyber criminals, but criminals in general are trying to find ways to get that holiday money, and they're stealing phones, they're stealing laptops. Kathy, I can't even think of how many cases you and I've had together over the years of the smash and grab out of the back of the car, parked at the mall at this season with the briefcase in it. Someone was trying to steal the briefcase. They actually stole the laptop as well. And now we've got a data breach over this that we have to go back and figure out. So, one of the things we're going to talk about today is documentation of compliance. You want to be able to document, if possible, the encryption of these devices, but if not, the internal policy you have that says, before we roll out these devices, our IT goes through and makes sure they're encrypted. Here's the process for how we do that. And it's a standard process we do on every laptop, and we verify it before it's rolled out, because that's very helpful in demonstrating that it was not, in fact, that kind of a unprotected device. And so that accidental or intentional data loss, um, happens a lot of times with devices. But another way it happens a lot of times is with emails. Emails, people attaching the wrong attachments to emails, people, what we would call fat fingering the email address, or sending it to the wrong person, or having an email or some other um, type of process where you're sending out information that gets into the hands of people that don't have any business having it. We've seen them with faxing. So you're faxing information maybe to an employer, like a doctor's note, saying, "Hey, this person was visited by us." That may contain too much information and reveal patient private information. We've seen people in the administrative departments attach spreadsheets that contained far too much patient information, or maybe your whole patient list. Any number of things like that can happen. We've seen cases where um, organizations are relying on third parties that have very weak security or very weak security practices, and they've accidentally exposed data in databases on the internet. So it's very important that you know who you're doing business with, that you're doing business with reputable providers and companies, that you have your business associates agreements in place, and that you do your training. You've got to train your workforce to understand that even a small little mistake can lead to very big consequences in this area.
And the last is the attack against connected medical devices.
You know, that's one. I think I wrote my first, what we would call a law review type of peer journal article on vulnerabilities in connected medical devices. I think it was back in 2016. There was a report that had come out before that about one of our political leaders, Hart, I forget the word it was, but pacemaker, and concerns about that. But you know, we're not seeing a lot of connected or attacks on connected medical devices in and of themselves. But when we're thinking of connected medical devices, we need to step back and realize that any device that is transmitting data, even if it's not part of its core functionality to make it work, but if it's transmitting data somewhere where that data is being collected, so the monitoring of it, if it's doing it over Wi-Fi or over internet connection, that would fall within this. That would also mean that if you had a ransomware attack that maybe encrypted certain areas of your network, it could impact those devices as well. And we're, what we're seeing right now are more of that along the periphery of the usage. We're not seeing a whole lot of directed attacks against medical devices in particular. Um, but when those things do happen, it can be a very catastrophic type of thing. So it's just something we want to be cognizant of, and we want to think of as a practice before we're using them and implementing them. Think about the security. And the other thing to think about is, I mean, I used this example a little while ago, right? And here I am wearing my Apple Watch. What is a medical device these days? How are we using that? How is that data being passed around? Users oftentimes don't think twice about saying, "Oh, yeah, let me connect this to my heart rate, and I have this stress monitoring app here," or whatnot. And that's fine as long as the users are doing it and using it. But people take a very different, they don't mind giving that data to Facebook, but you let a practice use that in a way that they're not happy with, or they kind of get an axe to grind or something like that down the road. Um, that's where they can raise those issues and create a big problem about it. And so it's just something you've got to be cognizant of and think about. It's not a huge risk. It's not like in our top category of what we're seeing, but it can be very difficult. And that brings in biometrics too. Texas has a biometrics data law. So how you're using biometric data, how you're storing that, you've got to protect all that information.
So I guess really the heart of the topic today is, what are recognized security practices?
Yeah. So really, I mean, recognized security practices in theory could be quite a few things. And I guess let me step back and say, why are we looking at recognized security practices? Why is uh, HHS looking at recognized security practices, kind of from a theoretical view? And I just went through this slide of these different types of attacks and different ways that they happen, and I've talked about the word complexity several times. In cybersecurity, we suffer from too much complexity. The complexity of the attacks, the risks is very difficult, very challenging, but also the complexity of the guidance that's out there is very challenging. It's very difficult. And if you put together, you know, 10 recognized cybersecurity experts and ask them to give you their recommendations over what you need to be doing, the odds are pretty good. Every one of those 10, their lists are going to be different. Their top 10 list may be in different order, and their advice and guidance over what's most important is going to be different. What I've found in my practice, and I think what HHS is learning as it matures in addressing and regulating in this space, is it's not always so critical that we get that list just right, or that we get, you know, the exact process perfect, as much as it is that we start by doing something, and that we do it in an organized and a reasonable and a logical manner. And so what we're seeing, and I see this with far too many healthcare practices, is we're suffering from what I call paralysis by analysis. We're so overwhelmed by the amount of information out there, by all the threats, by all the risks, by all these best practices and all the guidance, that we just sit there with our hands like going, oh my gosh, I can't figure out all this stuff. I'm just going to put it off. You know how we put off that email in our inbox that's going to require the most level of analysis and thought, and we always want to wait till we have the best time to respond to it. That's how we treat security in so many ways. And so, um, all of these different best practices, these recognized security practices, really the most foundational one for us here in the US is NIST. It's the one put out by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the cybersecurity framework. It's the one that's put out by the U.S. government for U.S. government um, agencies to use for their security. And so that's the one that's most recognized, even though it's not truly a requirement for businesses and operations within the U.S. organizations. It's the one U.S. agencies regulate to and adhere to, so they're most familiar with it, which means it's best for everybody else to kind of follow that. The biggest competing one for that is the international one. It's the one put out by the International Standards Organizations. It's ISO 27001. It's also very complex, it's very well respected. And if you go outside the US, that's the one you're going to see everyone focusing on. Um, but the lesson from either of these, if you've ever taken the time to go and look at this, is you're dealing with hundreds of pages of very intense, intricate, nuanced, guidance, and do this and do this and evaluate this. And the reality is, no one but the most disciplined of cybersecurity, truly cybersecurity experts, is really has the time and the resources to work through all that. And so when someone like me, Sean the lawyer, says, "Hey, you should be adhering to NIST. You should be doing this." So they're a framework. They're a place to look to bring order to all this chaos, but they're very challenging. And so what we've seen really is what we're calling Section 405D of the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, which is a way to say, if you don't have the team and the sophistication and the ability, the resources to regulate and to look to something like the NIST cybersecurity framework in its entirety for your compliance, then let's simplify that some. Let's pull the most important, most critical parts of this, and let's look at those, and let's get those as our standard. But the real goal here, by all of this with recognized security practices, is to have something that you're looking to, that you're using as your map, as your roadmap for how you're protecting your organization, and more importantly, the data that you're housing for your patients, your workforce, and others like that.
Like you said, Shawn, it's the 405D attempts to simplify a very complex issue. And basically, they have 10 cybersecurity practices that, depending on the size of your organization, whether you're a small or whether you're medium to large, they then provide more guidance for each of these topics or practices.
Right. And what we're really trying to do here, Kathy, and I don't want people to take what I just said about that previous slide as Shawn, this presenter, the Shawn, the lawyer, whatever, sitting here saying that it's not important to do all the things that are in NIST or that are in ISO 27001 or whatnot, because there's a reason for every single one of those requirements. Um, but what I'm really trying to say is, in the practical world that I see, that you see, Kathy, that we deal with healthcare practices, um, it's great to aspirationally try to get to those things. But instead of sitting here saying we're not going to do anything until we can put a plan together to reach that, we need to start somewhere. We need to begin taking action, and let's look to what are our most likely causes of harm, what are our most likely causes of losses, what are most of these, um, you know, breaches and cyber incidents going to come from, and let's find the solutions to those things. And that's where we really look at these, these 10 points here that, um, if it's in, I would say these are best practices. These are the places to start. So before you go worrying about all the complexity, let's look and see if we're doing these things. Number one, in email protection systems. You know, how are we protecting our email, number one, so that unauthorized people are not getting in and gaining access to them? So that's going to be your multi-factor authentication, your good passwords, using unique, sufficiently complex passwords, not repeating those over and over. Your endpoint protection system. So, we all know the words antivirus, right? Look, it's better to have the old fashioned antivirus than no antivirus. But we want to use a more sophisticated version, what we would call like a next gen endpoint protection to protect your devices, if possible, where feasible. um, your access management. So, this is something a lot of people do not think about, and you don't hear a lot about this because it's not a big ticket item for a lot of vendors. They're not going to make a whole lot of money off of telling you, hey, why is everyone within your organization an administrator within your environment? Why does everybody, including your receptionist up at the front desk who's simply answering phone calls and greeting people, why do they have the ability to download programs, to run programs, to access all of your patient data, to delete your patient data, all that kind of stuff? Why do these people have that level of access? They don't need it. Access management, how you manage who within your practice has access to what information, and who has the ability to make changes within the environment to do things like that. And how are maybe terminals? So, your terminals that people work from that maybe the public might have access to or something like that. Why does that have any level of access beyond the bare minimum? Thinking through that process. Data protection and loss prevention. Um, at the end of the day, all of the stuff we're talking about here is talking about one of two things. It's either protecting the security of your network environment, so how your practice is protected, or it's talking about protecting the data that is stored within your environment. And I'm going to tell you, regulators, they don't care that much about the protection of your practice, separate and apart from how you're protecting the sensitive data that is contained within that practice. That's what they're focused on. They're focused on protecting the sensitive data that you have within your practice. More directly, they're focused on how you protect that data. Okay. So, what does it all start with? It all starts with your data. Do you know what data you have? Do you know where it's located within your environment? Do you know how it comes into your environment? How it's processed within your environment? How it's securely removed from your environment when you no longer need it? One of the most effective data protection tools there is that most people don't think about is your data destruction policy. That is how you securely either get rid of or securely archive and remove from general accessibility data that you no longer have a need to have ready access to. That can take a data breach that impacts 10,000 patients going back over 20 years to down to a data breach that may impact 500 patients that are active whose data you currently need, right? So how you manage your data is critical. And then that who has access to it. Does that, departing physician who's going to start their own practice, do they have the ability to log in to take all of that data to take it with them to another practice or somewhere else, maybe to a consulting firm that may not have the protections in place of your practice? We see those kind of cases happen. So how you manage your loss prevention can be very impactful. Asset management. Do you even know what data, what assets, what devices you have connected to your network? Many practices do not. Are you allowing people to bring in their own personal devices, connect them into your network, download data, and then take that elsewhere? You're now responsible for your data wherever they may choose to take it. So, how you manage your assets, very important. How you manage and protect your network. Do you have firewalls? Do you have, the basic tools that are necessary to prevent maybe someone from the Ukraine or Russia or wherever from geolocation from logging in to your network? There are tools like that that are available. There are settings within the tools you already have, but many times you just don't know to use those. So that's very important. Your vulnerability management, that's your patching. How are these patches rolled out? Are you using software or devices within your environment that have operating systems that are no longer being supported by the vendors? So they don't have current patches. Bad guys, they know about all these vulnerabilities that come out that are being patched. And when you're not patching for those on a regular basis, you are opening yourself up to have those exploited. And by the way, something I need for everybody to understand. I know you're thinking, yes, we're just a small practice. Nobody knows who we are. These bad guys in, whatever Eastern European or whatever other country don't even know we exist. They don't care. They're running tools that scan the internet for the vulnerabilities that you have. They don't even know who you are many times until after they've already gotten into your network and they start pilfering around through your data through your operations, looking for your insurance policy that should be protected and encrypted with a password, looking for all of these things, your financials, your profit and loss statements, your collections, receivables. That's when they find out who you are. Okay, so don't think you're anonymous and that your anonymity is giving you protection, because it's not. They're running tools finding all this. So that vulnerability management, patching, not having remote desktop operating. And then another thing is, we want to see, and the regulators want to see, are you prepared to respond to an incident? Do you know what an incident even looks like for your practice? And when that happens, do you know who your first call should be to? Okay. Maybe it's internally, maybe it's to your managed service provider or the IT person or whoever it is. Maybe it should be to Kathy. Maybe your first call whenever you have something that doesn't make sense should be, hey, Kathy, I've got this going on. I don't know if this is a big deal or not. Have you ever seen anything like this? Have you ever heard of something like this? Right? Okay, how do you even know to reach Kathy? What if you have an encryption event that encrypts your network? You don't have the ability to get any of your emails, your policy that's saved. You don't have the ability to get that. Do you have a sheet that just has all the people you need to contact, the most critical information of that? Have you prepared ahead of time to even think through who those people would be? Okay. That's part of your real world incident response planning and preparation. Having that shows a sign of maturity. It shows that in your organization, in your practice, you have thought through these issues. And maybe you don't have that beautiful 30-page tabbed indexed response plan that goes and sits on the shelf, right? But maybe you don't really need that from a practical standpoint. You need that couple of pages to show the most important pieces of information that you've really thought through this in the real world. That's a sign of maturity. Okay. We've talked about medical devices. If you're, whatever you're using within your environment, just know bad guys are figuring out ways to do this, to get into this stuff. Sometimes people just tinker. I've seen cases where people have come into offices, they see the display sitting up on the wall in the room they're in, they see the computer sitting there. Maybe the physician or the PA hasn't logged out when they get out to go into the other room. Don't think hackers or even IT people who have that not malicious but curiosity don't run up and start punching some buttons to see what they can get to, how far they can get to. What all these other people whose data being, shows their name and they're being treated for whatnot. Just know that happens. You've got to be aware of this. You've got to train your people on this. And the foundation for your training starts with your policies. It starts with your policies and procedures. Number one, having the right policies and procedures in place. Number two, look, I'm a parent. I have 6 children, and my children, in my mind, are the most brilliant, most perfect little creations on the face of this earth. But you know what? As a parent, if I don't teach them and train them what to do, if I don't explain things and set expectations and walk them through scenarios, they don't learn this stuff through clairvoyance or osmosis. They have to be taught. As a practice, it's great to have the policies. You better have them, because you better believe HHS, OCR are going to come asking for them regardless of what kind of event you have. They're going to ask for all of them. Okay. But if you really want to start effectively having people comply with them, start your training by walking through the policies and explaining, here's this policy. Let me tell you why we have this. Okay. We have this because people lost patient data on a thumb drive, or they had a laptop stolen out of the back of a car, and that cost the practice $500,000 because they had, all this, whatever. Give them examples of why you're doing and why you're requiring the things you require, and you will find they adhere to it a whole lot better. So you better have the policies. They will be requested, and you better be able to show them. But at the end of the day, you then need to start training from those policies and then move more mature from there.
I think one point that we may not have clearly gotten across earlier this in the presentation was that required security or recognized security practices are not necessarily uh, are not required. It's an optional tool for the practices. But if that is the basis of the law, well, why should people even think about adopting it?
Sure. And so the first reason, and let me say, we just went down that top 10 list, right, Kathy? I mean, we walked through every one of those. So yesterday I did a webinar with Microsoft to many of their customers, um, talking about requirements for getting insurance coverage for a lot of businesses outside of healthcare and healthcare as well. But you know what? The top 10 list that we went through looked just like that list right there. I did an article 2 years ago in the Texas Bar Journal on how to stop ransomware attacks for law firms. And I had a list. And you know what? That list looked a lot like what we did just there. So, what you find is number one, the biggest reason you need to be doing this and following these recognized security practices is to make your practice more secure. Nobody wants to go through a data breach. You don't want to have to notify your patients of a data breach. You don't want to have your patient's information being compromised in a way that's going to require that. You don't want bad guys getting this information. You don't want your practice being shut down for a ransomware attack, forcing you into early retirement. Okay, that happens. We see it. Okay, so to make your practice more secure, one. Number two, to help bring some clarity and some guidance to provide you with a roadmap on your cybersecurity journey. Okay. I have a saying that I use when people say, Shawn, what is reasonable cybersecurity? You're a lawyer. What is reasonable cybersecurity? And I tell them no two organizations are exactly alike. Um, Reasonable cybersecurity is a process of assessing your risks and applying appropriate mitigations and executing that plan, okay, to better protect you in the appropriate manner for your practice. This helps give you that roadmap for how to start that process and go down that roadmap for reasonableness. Okay, so it's to bring clarity and simplicity to the extent possible to give you that starting point. Third, and this is what is the more legal and regulatory reason for this, is in 2022, we have seen the Office of Civil Rights, Health and Human Services, whenever they're going through a data request or an investigation, ask specifically for us to provide on behalf of the company or the practice evidence that they have been complying with recognized security practices for the last, at least the last year or longer. Okay. And the reason for that is they are now using that as a basis for mitigating fines and remedies that would otherwise come through these investigations and these enforcement actions or settlements. Okay. Why is that? Because what they realize is what we're all saying in the world of cybersecurity. Nobody is 100% secure. There is no such thing as a guarantee in the world of cybersecurity. You, the practice, have to get it right 100% of the time to prevent all problems. A bad guy only needs to get lucky one time. They recognize this and they know that. They're not holding you to the standard of absolute certainty. What they're holding you to is the standard that you actually care, that you actually try, and that you actually take reasonable steps to better protect your practice and the sensitive data that your practice holds. That's what they hold you to, that you do your part. Okay. Not that you get it 100% right, but that you care enough to do your part. And the way to do that is by following one of these recognized security practices that's out there, not just check the box, yes, we did it, yes, we did it, but that you truly go through the efforts and make reasonable progress, and that you be able to document, show your work, like when we were doing math back in grade school. If you can't show your work, then you didn't do it, right? Same rule applies here. Be able to show your work. And when you can show that you truly tried, you truly cared, and you truly put an appropriate amount of resources and effort into it, they're finding that this is I don't want to say a get out of jail free card, but it certainly is a mitigation to where they say, hey, we don't need to teach you a lesson because you're already doing your part.
So I we've already had at least one question, but what do I do now? Where do I get started?
So, I use my little phrase of reasonable cybersecurity as a process, not a definition. Well, reasonable compliance is a process. It's not a definition. But the first step in both of these is you have to assess where you are in the world of cybersecurity. If you haven't assessed your risk, how do you know what to protect? How do you know what to protect against? Like I asked you about your data. Do you know what data do you have? Where it is? If you don't know what you have, how do you protect it? How do you know when it's been compromised? You assess your current state of affairs for cybersecurity, same for compliance. Assess where you are right now. Have you done anything? Unfortunately, some practices that we deal with, and these are the ones that keep us in business, it's always someone else's responsibility. Well, we hired someone and they were supposed to take care of this. Well, how do you know they did? How do you know they're backing up your data? Have you asked to see it? Have you asked them to demonstrate for you that they can restore that copy? Are you blindly just saying, nope, not my problem, kind of the monkey see, monkey do type thing? Okay, assess where you are, get an accurate picture of that. And then, you start from there really on your next couple of steps, which is, you know, figure out a roadmap from where you need to go based on that assessment. Start documenting this. You've got to document that compliance, or it's like our homework. If we can't show our work, then we didn't do it. And then back to what I said about this all being a process. Cyber risk, just like compliance, is not something you do once and fix. We never fix cyber risk. We never fix compliance. It's an ongoing process of assessing where we are, assessing our risks, assessing what rules and regulations there are out there that we need to comply with, assessing the nature of our organization, of our business, of our practices, of what we do, assessing the tools we're using, okay? Whether it be devices or applications and programs. And then from there, determining where our greatest risks are, developing a plan, a strategic plan to begin addressing those risks in a timely manner, and executing that plan. And then as we're executing it, we're reassessing and we're re-updating. And so it's an ongoing process. There's no end in sight, but that's the way we have to do it.
So we just threw this slide in. The OCR recently released a video on recognized security practices. Now, if you felt like we were a little dry today, let me tell you, they beat us because they took a complex topic and really um, did a good job in drying it out. So, if you want more information, it is a resource, and if you can't find it, uh, I'm more than happy to provide that for you. So, the OCR in this video actually did give us a list of what they suggest that we have as evidence of compliance. Shawn, do you want to go through these for us?
Yeah. So really, I'll tell you when we get a data request, and that's where it starts, right? So you have an incident that we then have to report to the OCR. We guide you through that process of going to the portal and what information you need to put in. You submit the request. If it's over, I mean, not the request, the report. If it's over 500 patients, 500 or more, you get the pleasure of going on their wall of shame. And so it's now public what's happened. And maybe a week, maybe a couple of days, you'll get a call from the OCR investigator verifying your report. Okay. And then within some period of time after that, it could be a week, it could be a month. We've had them go 9, 10, 12 months or longer. Down the road, you get what's called a data request. It is this extensive request for information, and it doesn't just pertain to this event that you just reported. It covers everything about compliance with your practice. And the first thing they're going to ask for is provide your policies and procedures that you have for your practice. That's going to include your basic things like your business associate agreements, your training materials, your privacy policies, your record of training, what slides were shown during the training, all of this stuff they want to see, right? Your risk assessments are a big factor of what they've been looking for the last couple of years. So you're going to want to be able to provide that as your policies, your procedures that are required. They're then going to ask for you to show your evidence of adherence to or following your recognized security practices. That's going to be things any there's no specific requirement on what that is. If you're using a vendor to help you, a managed service provider, it could be your documentation with them. You know your the word I'm looking for, master services agreement, your scope of work, statement of work, your description of what services you're using. You're going to want to have documentation from them or whoever within your practice is adhering to one of these RSPs. So it may be a download of the NIST cybersecurity framework. It may be a download or a screenshot or whatnot of the 405D website with these lists where I mean, we've seen people do them in pen where you print it out and you go through and you check it. Maybe you write a date by it for when you implement it. Any number of things, anything you can put together that shows you're making a good faith effort. We do strategic plans for many of our clients where we do an initial assessment. We then come back, we put together a strategic plan with timelines on it, and then go through and mark each time those are completed or fill out that update. There's any number of ways you can do this. Like I mentioned earlier, your training, you're going to want to see your slides, your attendee checklists, any other testing that may have been done, any of those materials. You need to keep that. You need to keep all that together, and then screenshots where you're doing a lot of this stuff digitally and online.
Shawn, I think it's important to point out that if you do have a cyber incident, the OCR is going to not want your compliance at that moment in time. What they're really looking for is that you started this at least 12 months prior to the incident. And going back and recreating that is sometimes a challenge.
That's exactly right, Kathy. They're looking to see why this happened. And so why did this incident happen? And when you're able to show that, because we know in cybersecurity, many of these things start 6 months or longer before you discover it. Um, before the hackers reveal themselves, they've been in your network stealing your information. And so, what the OCR is looking for is to say, okay, you had this bad thing happen. Before we smack you for it, we're going to look back and see, okay, a year ago, were you making a reasonable effort to keep this from happening? And by showing this, it shows, hey, you're not just doing it right now today after it already happened, but before it happened, you were taking reasonable steps ahead of time to keep this from happening. And that's really important.
So, in summary, we know that we want to keep you from having an OCR investigation, but those bad things do happen to good practices. And the biggest takeaway is the more you do proactively, the easier it is to deal with the investigations that that are going to come. I know we're right at time limit for the presentation. Just a couple of things real quickly. You will receive an email that looks at or that will have a link to the recorded webinar as well as a link to the CME evaluation. If you would fill that out, that would be very helpful. Your CME certificates will be emailed in about 10 business days. Um, if you have questions after the webinar, you can certainly send them to cyber@tmlt.org and we will get you some answers. I was trying to see
And
one question.
Kathy, let me throw in, I'm always happy to talk with people about this as well. If they want to give me a call, I'm always happy to talk and explain more as well. So that's always an offer out there.
Thanks, Shawn. Um, just as a starting point, there's a couple of questions. You might want to download the cybersecurity guide on the file pod for your organizational size, as well as the general 405D uh, resource list. I put a bunch of links in there that could be helpful to you. I think that's covered most of the questions. It has been a real pleasure to have you today, Shawn. Thank you for joining us. We're already talking about maybe doing a follow-up webinar next year, so stay tuned because um, we do get a lot of questions about now what? How do I implement this? So if if you just know that there are some possible, or we will possibly have a follow up webinar. Sorry, a little later on. Um, if there are no other questions, I'm going to wrap it up. And again, thank you for giving us an hour of your time. It's a busy time of year, and we appreciate everyone joining and joining the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
let Kathy know what topics you want us to cover in the future.
Thank you, Shawn, for that plug, too.
You're very welcome.